get you physically. You can see my back. I'll just back up against the. See how my back's not really moving very much? It's because this really is all about what happens right here, and ultimately it's not because what's happening right here. It's because what's happening here, which is your diaphragm. Your diaphragm, the muscle that is called your diaphragm, or that we call the diaphragm, drops down when we relax it, which makes our tummies come out. And so that's the thing that you want to do. That's the center of all this stuff. It's the most important part of all this stuff. And for me, I've got some basic rules that I adapted from a variety of different practices that I use personally 2 times a day. Reason why I adapted these rules, took up these rules, is because they were simple rules, easy rules, and rules that I would abide by, because if it's too complicated, I don't do it. And so the rules are breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. And again, there's lots of practices where you breathe in through your mouth and out through your nose, and you do the thing with your nails. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. This is just a simple approach that's based on some neurological information about how the limbic system works and the best way to turn it off when it doesn't need to be on. And I'll get to that in a second. But so in through your nose, out through your mouth. Count when you breathe in, count when you breathe out. You just want that number to be the same. There's a neurological basis for that too. Your back wants to be free if possible. If you have physiological reasons why you can't do that, that's cool too. However, if you can, that's cool. It just makes it easier. This is all about trying to make this process as easy as possible. And one of the most important rules is to practice. Now, practice means when we're doing things that don't have to do with performance is one way to think about it. But to do like when I'm practicing, all I'm doing is breathing. It's what I'm there for. It's why I'm there. It's why I'm doing it. I'm just doing the breathing practice. I'm staying familiar with this in-out thing. I do it twice a day, so I'm never more than 12 hours from the last time I did it, on and on and on. But it's all about making sure this process is as easy as it can possibly be and as available and as accessible as possible, because I want to be doing it whenever I need to, in a way that I'm confident I can do. Why is that important? So this is really the big kahuna about all this stuff, that we have this fight, flight, limbic system thing. There's a variety of different ways to talk about it in terms of exactly where it is. But what it does is it's supposed to keep us alive, but it's supposed to keep us alive in a very specific kind of situation. That situation is a direct lethal threat. So taking it down to brass tacks is to say that if somebody has a gun at my head and I know it's loaded and their fingers on the trigger, that's a lethal situation. Like, for example, if you encounter a bear in the woods, that bear is not a threat to you unless it's hungry, or it sees you as a threat, or it sees you as between, if it's a mother and its cubs. There are specific reasons that make bears threats. They're not always threats. There are many situations that you might encounter a bear where the bear is more likely to leave you than you are to leave the bear. We are all animals and do things for specific reasons at specific times. And especially in the natural world, those things are way more predictable than they are, as you probably have figured out, in our cultural world. And so the reason why I say that is not so you can go out and, please don't go out and start confronting bears to figure out which ones are going to eat you. The important thing is that this limbic system is to keep us safe when we are about to be killed. It's not to keep us from worrying. It's not about worry. It's not about whether or not we paid our taxes. It's not about whether or not the mortgage got paid. It has nothing to do with those things, because ultimately, as much as it would suck if you forgot to pay the mortgage, you're not going to die from it. The people that own your house because they own your mortgage aren't going to come to you and shoot you in the head because you didn't pay. I mean, hopefully, because you didn't pay. And even if they were, again, this is kind of far-fetched at this point, sorry, but literally it's like, if you're not exposed to a lethal threat of a gun at your head or a knife at your throat or something like that, then the limbic system should not be engaged. And the problem is, very often it is. If we're nervous, if we think we screwed up, it will come on. Now, there's, if you think about sort of our consciousness as a way to mediate this, that's cool, because the limbic system coming on is not the problem. And I say this to people all the time. If your limbic system comes on, it's not the problem. It's not about it coming on. It's how long it stays on. And if you wake up at midnight because you forgot to pay the mortgage and you stay up until 7 o'clock in the morning lying in bed going, oh, I forgot to pay the mortgage, that's the kind of problem I'm talking about. Because ultimately, first of all, as I said, the mortgage isn't going to kill you. Second of all, although you could, maybe you should get up and pay it online or however you do that. Not suggesting anybody do stuff online like that, but if you're going to do something about it, do. But if you're not, you laying there in bed thinking about the fact that it didn't get paid it's about the limbic system being engaged at a time when it's completely unnecessary and completely useless. And the problem with those situations even further in the context of our culture is that those sorts of situations, because there is no actual lethal threat, there is no absence of an actual lethal threat. For example, if you did run into a bear in the forest, you'd know very quickly whether or not you were going to get eaten by that bear. And whichever way that situation goes, there's clarity. And most of the time, the bear is not going to eat you, and then you'll know that situation's over because you'll see the bear's butt run through the woods, or whatever it happens to be is moving away from you, and there's clarity. We don't have that with mortgage payments. We don't have that with insurance companies. We don't have that with the variety, most of the things that we deal with in our culture that trigger the limbic system. So then the breath work is what I use to come back to where I am. It sucks I didn't pay the mortgage on time. However, I'll get to it in the morning. It's not going to change anything because the banks don't have to open up and they're not going to register blah, 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 blah. None of that's going to matter. It's late, it's late. That's what's actually happened. That's where I am right now, is that is the thing that has happened, and it's not going to kill me. And my limbic system being on right now as a result of that having happened is just depleting my energy. I talk a lot about how, in fact, our bodies are using energy to respond to those situations, even if they're only in our heads. And that's energy that we could otherwise use, that we could use for other situations. So in times, like this, where there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty, I'm very much focused on what of that uncertainty is lethal to me right now. Like, for example, the COVID. I call it the COVID because it's fun. If I have the COVID, I have the COVID. If I don't have the COVID, I don't have the COVID. Right now, in this situation right now, there's nobody around me, okay? There's no one around me from whom I could get it. And so the possibility that could happen is not something that I want to be exerting energy on. I don't want to be in a place of, what would happen if blah, 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 because it's a waste of my time. My limbic system's engaged for absolutely no reason. And that concern about what might happen, coulda, shoulda, woulda, isn't going anywhere at any point because it's not present in the first place. The question of whether or not I'm going to get the COVID is an open question. There's no beginning to it. There's no end to it. And so if I engage my limbic system in response to that question, it's just going to keep cranking and cranking and cranking, using up energy, keeping me in a shallow breath place, overusing the energy that I have available, exhausting me, doing all kinds of things that ultimately suck. And so I take up this breathing practice that I talk about all the time to come back to what's actually going on right now. Where am I in space right now? What's actually happening right now? So that's a thing. Now, if we take up a situation where, in fact, I might be in a crowded room. Okay, so what can I do? What's in my control? What's not? Because if I'm going to get the COVID, I'm going to get it. And if I'm in a situation where things are random and a lot's going on, I don't know. Might happen, might not happen. But I want to be in as calm a place as possible in that situation so I can be looking around and making choices and making decisions. I don't want to be in a place, because when we're in our limbic system, it's just a survival response. And literally the way that our whole physiology is set up is to prioritize those survival response mechanisms, whatever they happen to be in our bodies. And so we're not going to be in a place where thinking something through is available to us, because it's not a survival thing. In a short-term lethal situation, kind of survival situation, what we're about is climbing up the tree to not be eaten by the bear. It's not about the kind of tree. It's not about how pretty it is, how tall it is, how great it is. It's about the most available one. Boom, we're going to go over, we're going to climb up there. And this is a situation where, you find yourself at the top of the tree and you don't know how you did it, because that memory function, that thinking about what we're doing function isn't even going on. And if it is an actual lethal threat at that time, then that's where I want my headspace to be. But if I'm in a room full of people who may or may not have COVID and may or may not be wearing masks and may or may not be many other different things, that might be, and if I can say this might be a lethal situation, then I'm going to err on the side of not, going to be taking up my breathing, going to be paying attention to what's going on around me. Now, there might be those of you out there who says, oh, that's a great idea. So you're in the middle of the situation where you may be exposed to COVID and you're going to start deep breathing. And so you're going to be sucking it into, well, I mean, all that's too complicated for me. And you're going to have to deal with situations as you come upon them. But the larger question is it a space where it's actually a lethal threat, where I'm in danger? And do I want my limbic system to be determining what I'm going to do next? You answer that question for yourself. If the answer to that question is no, then this deep breathing thing is going to be useful for you. And you're going to come back to a place where you have way more access to thinking stuff through. And as I've said, I can actually release my diaphragm without having any breathing involved at all. As you can tell, I'm exhaling because I'm talking. And so if you want to start doing this when you're in that kind of place, that'll help too, because ultimately it's the connection between the diaphragm and the limbic system that indicates the limbic system. If this muscle is released and relaxed, then obviously what's going on around me is not a lethal threat. It's how we do a feedback loop to our limbic systems to keep it aware of what's actually going on around us. So that's it for What's Next for Dr. Joel today. Back to Basics Sunday. Hope this is useful and hope everyone's having a great